life before I came to Christ was unfulfilled, I guess you would say. It was almost like I had a wall up and I didn't want anyone to break that wall down, so when other Christians came to me and tried to talk to me about Christ, that wall went up and I didn't want to talk to anyone about it. So I went to my vocational school, Pickaway Ross, and I made a friend, and in the beginning of our friendship, he had mentioned to me that he was a Christian, and so I was very apprehensive about that because I didn't want anything to do with it. I didn't know anything about it, and unknown things scare me a little bit, so I just didn't want to talk about it at all. So whenever he would mention anything about it, I just went silent. When I graduated and I went to college, in my first semester of school at college, I had an art history class, and I started to realize that Christianity's been around for a long time. We learned about the Protestant Reformation, which really triggered something in me to learn more, so I called up a friend that I made in my vocational school, and I asked him if I could come to church with him, and of course he said yes. So I went to church, and about the second or third time maybe, we had a guest speaker, and he was a missionary, and he began to tell his story about how he was bringing someone to Christ, and that someone in particular was of a different faith, which really impacted me, and it ended with me sitting in the pews that night bawling my eyes out. So sometime after that, I began to get really curious about Christianity and Christ and everything. Called up my old high school friend, and I knew he was a Christian. So we went to an IHOP where I currently live in Kettering, and we talked so much about all these different things, and I asked him a bunch of questions about Christianity and what it was like for him giving himself to Christ, and he didn't laugh at me. He didn't try to shove anything down my throat. He just was real, and I really respected that about him. About midway into the conversation, he looked at me with tears in his eyes, and he said, God gave his only son for me. And at that point, I was starting to cry too, because he was crying, and I realized that God has done so much for me. So the Sunday after that, after morning service was over, I went to the pastor's wife and I prayed to receive Christ, because at that moment, I think with my friend, I knew that I wanted Jesus in my life, but I didn't feel confident enough to make that decision. So that Sunday, I went to the pastor's wife and I prayed with her to receive Christ, because I knew that I needed him in my life. I needed him in my life because I realized that I was living in sin. I was practically drowning in sin, and I needed help. I remember before being saved, I remember being so afraid of death because I didn't know what was going on after that, So I have this reassurance now that where I'm going, I know I'll be happy and I will be with my Creator. So also just going throughout the daily business of life, I seem to be happier and more joyful than I was. I try not to give myself over to anger anymore, and I feel like I've really improved since I've had God beside me, and with him helping me and giving me that unconditional love that he does. My name is Rossiter, and Jesus died in my place for my sins.